Hello there, welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Galaxy, where humans face the unknown, outsmart the impossible, and turn every test into victory. So sit back and let the story begin.
The smell hit Nurse Vela before anything else. That IT was a thick, sharp smell, like metal and old fruit mixed together. She pressed her four nostrils shut and looked down at the creature lying on the floor of the intake bay. It was a Grellian sand serpent, almost 2 meters long, covered in cracked gray scales, with deep wounds running along its belly. Yellow fluid leaked from its mouth. Its 6 eyes were half closed. Who brought this in? Vela asked, turning to Technician Buru, who stood near the door with both hands behind his back, clearly trying to stay as far from the creature as possible. A cargo crew found it stuck in a ventilation shaft on Dock 14, Boru said. They think it crawled in from one of the southern trade ships. Vela looked at the serpent again. Grellian sand serpents were classified as a level 3 hazard. Their bite could dissolve bone. Their blood was mildly acidic. No station in the Helix cluster accepted them for treatment. Most species simply avoided them, and those who found injured ones usually left them to die. Has anyone contacted the Wildlife Disposal Unit? Vela asked. Bora nodded. They said they will come in 6 hours. 6 hours, Vela repeated. She looked at the serpent. It let out a weak hiss, barely louder than a breath. One of its eyes turned toward her. For a moment, she felt something she had not expected, sadness. But she pushed it away. The creature was dangerous. The rules were clear. She was about to close the intake bay door when she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy footsteps, the kind that made the floor vibrate slightly. "Excuse me," said a voice. "I was told to report here for my first shift." Vela turned and froze. Standing behind her was a human. She had read the briefing files, of course. Everyone on Waystation Arella had received the files when the Galactic Medical Council approved the Human Volunteer Exchange Program. The file said humans came from a planet called Earth, a Class 12 death world with extreme weather, active volcanoes, predatory animals, toxic plants, and an atmosphere so thick with nitrogen that most species could not survive 10 minutes on its surface. Humans had evolved there by becoming the most effective predators in their world. They could run for hours without stopping. They healed from injuries that would kill most species. Their bones were dense. Their muscles were strong. And they had forward-facing eyes, like every hunter in the galaxy. The files also said they were friendly. Vela had found that part hard to believe. The human standing in front of her was a female named Mara Torres. She was not especially tall by human standards, according to the file, about 170 centimeters. She had dark hair pulled back from her face and brown eyes that moved quickly around the room, taking everything in. She wore the standard gray medical uniform of Waystation Orella, though it looked tight across her shoulders and arms. "You are the human volunteer," Vela said. "Yes," Mara said, and she smiled. Vela took a small step back. The smile showed teeth. Flat teeth, mostly, but still teeth. It was a display that, in almost every other species, meant aggression. The file said that for humans it meant the opposite. Vela was not fully convinced. "I am Nurse Vela. I manage the recovery ward on level 4. You will be working with me." She paused. "Welcome to Waystation Orella." "Thank you," Mara said. She looked past Vela into the intake bay. Her smile disappeared. "What is that?" "A Grellian sand serpent. It was found injured in the station's ventilation system. It is dangerous and classified as untreatable here. Disposal will collect it later." Mara stepped closer to the door. "Disposal. The Wildlife Disposal Unit. They handle hazardous creatures." "Handle them how?" Vela hesitated. "They will euthanize it." Mara stared at the serpent for a long time. She did not blink. Vela noticed that humans blinked much less than most species. It was unsettling. "It is suffering," Mara said quietly. Her voice had changed. It was lower now, softer. "Yes," Vela agreed. "But there is nothing we can do. Its classification does not allow for medical treatment at this station. The acid in its blood makes surgery nearly impossible, and its bite is extremely dangerous. No one here is trained or equipped to handle it." Mara crouched down near the floor. She was looking at the serpent's wounds through the transparent barrier of the intake bay door. Her expression had changed in a way Vela could not read. It was not fear. It was not curiosity. It looked almost like pain, though the human was not injured. I have treated venomous animals before, Mara said. On Earth, I volunteered at a wildlife rescue. Snakes, spiders, scorpions. Things that could kill you if you were not careful. But they still deserve help. Vela felt her stomach tighten. This is not Earth. That creature's bite can dissolve your bones. I heard you the first time, Mara said. She stood up. She looked at Vela directly, and there was something in her brown eyes that made Vela feel very small and very still. I'm not asking for permission. I am asking where your surgical supplies are. The station had been warned that humans were stubborn. The briefing files had called it persistence and listed it as one of the species' most notable survival traits. Humans did not stop. When they decided something mattered, they kept going until they succeeded or until their body physically could not continue. Some scientists believe this trait alone was responsible for humanity's dominance on their terrible planet. Vela looked at the serpent on the floor. She looked at the human standing in front of her. She thought about the rules, the classifications, the safety protocols. Then she thought about the look in the serpent's 6 eyes. Follow me, she said. The surgical preparation room on level 3 had not been used for anything larger than a Kalari tree frog in over 2 cycles. Vela pulled old sheets off the equipment while Mara examined every tool on the wall rack, picking them up one by one, testing their weight, asking questions. What is this one for? Mara asked, holding up a curved silver instrument. Tissue bonding. It seals wounds using focused heat. Mara nodded. Like a cauterizer. Good. I will need that. Vela watched the human move through the room with a calm focus that did not match the situation. They were about to operate on a creature that could kill them both with a single bite. Mara acted like she was getting ready to cook a meal. You understand, Vela said carefully, that if the serpent bites you during the procedure, I cannot save you. Its venom will begin dissolving your tissue in less than 1 minute. Even a human's healing abilities cannot recover from that. I understand, Mara said, pulling on a pair of protective gloves. They were made for Vela species and were far too thin for human hands, but Mara stretched them on anyway. That is why we are going to sedate it first. Our sedatives have never been tested on Grellian serpents. Then we will start with a low dose and watch the response. Mara looked at her. I have done this kind of thing before. Not with this exact species, obviously, but the principle is the same. You stay calm, you move slow, you pay attention. The animal is more scared of you than you are of it. Vela doubted that very much. They moved the serpent from the intake bay to the surgical room using a gravity stretcher. The creature hissed weakly as they lifted it, and Vela saw Mara's jaw tighten, but the human did not pull back. She positioned herself at the serpent's head, the most dangerous end, and spoke to it. Easy, Mara whispered. Easy. You are okay. Nobody is going to hurt you. Vela felt her skin prickle. She had seen many medical professionals work with distressed creatures during her career. Most of them kept their distance. Most of them treated animals like problems to be solved. She had never seen anyone talk to a dangerous creature as if it were a frightened child. Boru appeared at the door, his wide eyes even wider than usual. Nurse Vela, what are you doing? Assisting the human volunteer with a surgical procedure. On the sand serpent. Yes. Boru stared at Mara, who was carefully cleaning the wounds along the serpent's belly with a damp cloth. Yellow fluid and old blood came away on the white fabric. The serpent's body trembled, but it did not strike. She is touching it, Boru whispered, as if he could not believe what his eyes were showing him. Yes, she is, Vela said. With her hands. Go back to your station, Boru. He left, but Vela knew he would tell everyone. By the end of the shift, the entire station would know that the human volunteer was performing surgery on a level 3 hazard creature with her bare hands. Mara worked for 3 hours. The sedation worked, though they had to adjust the dosage twice. Once the serpent was still, Mara opened the wounds one by one and examined the damage inside. There was infection, deep infection that had spread through the creature's body for what looked like days. Something had attacked it, possibly another animal on the trade ship where it had been hiding. The wounds were not just cuts. They were bites. Something tried to eat this thing, Mara said, her hands deep inside the serpent's body cavity. Her arms were covered in yellow blood up to her elbows. The blood was mildly acidic, and Vela could see small red marks forming on Mara's skin where the gloves had torn. The human ignored them. Is the damage fatal? Vela asked. It would be if we leave it, but I think I can clean out the infection and seal the major wounds. The internal organs look intact. This animal is a fighter. Vela handed her tools as she asked for them. The tissue bonder, the fluid extractor, a small laser scalpel that Mara handled with surprising precision. For a species known across the galaxy for their physical strength and aggression, humans had remarkably steady hands. Mara's fingers moved with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature from a Class 12 death world. At T1 point, the sedation began to wear off. The serpent's tail twitched. Its 6 eyes flickered open. Vela jumped backward, knocking a tray of instruments to the floor. Mara did not move. She simply placed one hand flat on the serpent's head, right between its eyes, and held it there. "Shoo," she said. "I know it hurts. I'm almost done. Just a little longer." The serpent looked at her. All 6 of its eyes focused on her face. Vela waited for the strike. She waited for the mouth to open, for the bone-dissolving venom to fly. She was already calculating the fastest route to the emergency station. The serpent closed its eyes and lowered its head. Mara continued working. When it was over, the serpent was cleaned, sealed, and wrapped in thermal bandages. Mara washed her hands and arms in the decontamination sink. The acid burns on her forearms were bright red and blistered in places. Vela brought a medical kit, but Mara waved it off. "These will heal in a few days," she said. "Humans are good at healing. You are burned. I have had worse." She paused, then smiled again, that strange, teeth-showing expression. "I once got bitten by a rattlesnake back home. My mother was more upset about the torn jeans than the bite." Vela did not understand the joke, but she understood something else. She understood that this human had just spent 3 hours in pain, working to save a creature that every other species in the galaxy had given up on. Not because she was ordered to, not because it benefited her, but because she believed the creature's life was worth the suffering. "Why?" Vela asked before she could stop herself. "Why would you risk your life for an animal you have never seen before?" Mara dried her hands. She looked at the sleeping serpent on the table, its breathing slow and steady for the first time since it had arrived. "Because someone had to," she said. "And I was here." Vela stood in the quiet room for a long time after Mara left. She looked at the serpent, alive and resting. She looked at the yellow bloodstains on the floor and the acid-burned gloves in the disposal bin. She picked up her communicator and opened a new file. At the top, she typed, "Daily Observation Report, Human Volunteer Program, Day 1. She paused for a moment, thinking, then she began to write. Word spread through way station Orella, the way fire spreads through dry grass, beat why the second day. Every species on the station knew about the human who had operated on a Grellian sand serpent with her bare hands. The story grew each time it was told. In the version Vela heard from the cafeteria workers, Mara had fought the serpent into submission first. In the version Boru told to the maintenance crew, the human had been bitten 3 times and simply continued working. In the version that reached Station Commander Drelik's office, the human had apparently laughed while performing the surgery. None of this was true, but it did not matter. What mattered was that the station was now watching Mara Torres very carefully. Mara did not seem to notice. On her second day, she reported for her shift on time, checked on the serpent, which she had named Dusty, and then asked Vela what else needed to be done. "We have 12 patients in the recovery ward," Vela said, pulling up the roster on her screen. "Most are standard cases. Broken limbs, post-surgical recovery, infection treatment. There's also a Vin child in room 8 who was injured in a transport accident. She has been here for 3 weeks and is not healing well." "Not healing well, how?" Mara asked. Vela hesitated. "Physically, her injuries are repairing, but she will not eat. She will not sleep. She cries for most of the day, and the sedatives we give her only make it worse. Her mother visits when she can, but she works double shifts on the lower decks. The child is alone most of the time. Mara's face changed. It was the same expression Vela had seen when Mara first looked at the serpent. That strange, almost physical reaction to another creature's pain, as if the human could feel it in her own body. "Can I see her?" Mara asked. The Vin child's name was Soli. She was 6 years old, small even for her species, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that took up most of her face. Her left arm was in a regeneration cast, and there were fading bruises along her neck and shoulders. When Vela and Mara entered her room, she was sitting in the corner of her bed, hugging her knees, staring at the wall. "Soli," Vela said gently, "this is Mara. She's a new nurse on the station. She's going to help take care of you." Soli looked at Mara. Her dark eyes went wide. She pressed herself deeper into the corner. "She is scared," Vela whispered. "I know," Mara whispered back. She did not approach the bed. Instead, she sat down on the floor. Right there, on the cold metal floor of the hospital room, she crossed her legs and Saturday Vela stared. "What are you doing?" "Making myself small," Mara said. She looked up at Soli and gave a little wave. Not a smile this time. Mara seemed to understand that showing teeth to a frightened child of another species might not help. Just a small wave with her fingers. Soli watched from behind her knees. Mara reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out something Vela had not seen before. It was a small, flat rectangle made of paper. Actual paper, the kind that came from trees on Earth. Mara began to fold it. Her fingers worked quickly, pressing creases into the paper with her thumbnail, folding corners, tucking edges. After a minute, she held up the result. It was a small paper bird with wings spread wide and a pointed beak. She set it on the floor and gave it a gentle push. It slid across the smooth metal surface towards Soli's bed. Soli's eyes followed it. She did not move, but she was watching. Mara made another one. This time it was a different shape, something with 4 legs and a long neck. She set it next to the bird. Then she made another, and another. Within 10 minutes, there was a small army of paper creatures arranged on the floor between Mara and Soli's bed. Soli uncurled slightly. Her feet dropped from the bed to the floor. She picked up the bird and turned it over in her small blue hands. She looked at Mara. "Bird," Mara said, pointing at it. "It flies." She made a flying motion with her hand. Soli watched, then looked at the bird again. Very slowly, she held it up and made the same motion that Mara's eyes softened. She nodded. "That is right. You are natural." Soli did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. Vela could see it. The way the child's shoulders relaxed, the way her grip on the paper bird became gentle instead of tight. Mara was not treating her like a patient. She was treating her like a person. Over the next hour, Mara sat on that floor and taught Soli how to fold paper. She showed her how to make a simple shape, a box, and when Soli managed it on her 3rd try, Mara clapped her hands softly and said "beautiful" in a voice that made even Vela feel warm. Soli ate her lunch that day. All of it. The attending physician, Dr. Palax, noticed the change on his evening rounds. He checked Soli's vitals and found that her stress hormones had dropped for the first time in 3 weeks. He found Vela in the hallway. "What happened with the Vin child?" he asked. The human volunteer spent time with her. "Doing what?" "Sitting on the floor. Folding paper." Palax blinked all 4 of his eyes. "And that worked?" Vela did not know how to explain it. She had watched the whole thing, and she still was not sure she understood. On her world, medicine was science. You identified the problem, you applied the correct treatment, and the patient recovered. Mara had not applied any treatment. She had not given Soli any medicine. She had just sat with her and made paper animals and talked in a soft voice. "Dr. Palax," Vela said, "I think there are things about human medicine that our files did not cover." That evening, Vela went down to the intake bay to check on the serpent. Dusty was awake, coiled in the heated enclosure Mara had set up using spare warming pads from the supply closet. The creature's wounds were already beginning to close. Its 6 eyes tracked Vela as she approached, but did not hiss. It did not bare its fangs. Mara had been visiting it between shifts, Boru told her, bringing it food. talking to it, changing its bandages with those same steady, careful hands. The human talks to it like it understands her, Boru said, sounding confused. Maybe it does, Vela said. She went back to her office and opened her observation report. Under day 2, she wrote, the human appears to generate a calming effect on patients through physical presence and vocal tone alone. This effect is not limited to her own species. It extends to children of other species and to hazardous wildlife. I do not fully understand the mechanism. Further observation is required. She saved the file, turned off her screen, and sat in the dark for a while, thinking about a woman who sat on cold floors for frightened children and burned her own skin for dying animals. She was beginning to understand why humans had survived their terrible planet. IT was not because they were strong. It was not because they were fast or clever or tough. That IT was because they refused to let anything suffer alone. 3 weeks into the human volunteer program, Waystation Orella received a distress signal from a mining vessel called the Broken Fawn. There had been a structural collapse in the lower tunnels. 14 miners were trapped under rubble with injuries ranging from crushed limbs to toxic dust inhalation. The Broken Fawn's medical officer had died in the collapse. They needed help, and Waystation Orella was the closest station with a medical team. Station Commander Drellick called an emergency briefing. Vela sat in the 3rd row, her data pad on her lap, listening as Drellick explained the situation. The commander was a tall, Orthani male with gray-green skin and a voice that carried like a drum. He stood at the front of the room with a holographic map of the mining vessel floating behind him. The collapse occurred in Shaft 9, approximately 400 meters below the vessel's main deck, Drellick said. The environment is extremely hazardous. Temperatures in the lower tunnels exceed 50 degrees. The air contains high levels of silicate dust and trace amounts of methane. Gravity in the mining shafts is set to 1.4 standard, which will make movement difficult for most of our crew. Vela watched as several nurses and doctors shifted uncomfortably. 1.4 standard gravity meant that everything would feel almost half again as heavy. For her species, that meant exhaustion within an hour. For the smaller species on the medical team, it could mean broken bones just from walking. I need a volunteer team of 4, Drella continued. 2 medics, 1 engineer, 1 emergency responder. The shuttle leaves in 30 minutes. The room was quiet. Everyone understood what the commander was asking. He was asking someone to go into a collapsing tunnel, in crushing gravity, in poisonous air, to treat 14 injured miners who might already be dead. I will go, said a voice from the back of the room. Every head turned. Mara Torres stood up from her seat in the last row. She had been sitting so still that most people had forgotten she was there. The gravity will not be a problem for me, she said. Earth's gravity is 1.0 standard. 1.4 is heavy, but I can work in it. Drellick looked at her. Vela could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The commander was a careful leader. He did not take unnecessary risks. But he was also practical, and he knew what everyone in the room knew. The human was the only one on the station who could function normally in those conditions. You are a volunteer nurse, Drellick said. You are not trained for emergency rescue. I was an emergency medical technician on Earth for 4 years before I joined this program, Mara said. I have worked building collapses, mine accidents, and natural disasters. I have carried injured people out of burning structures. With respect, Commander, this is what I was trained for. The room was very quiet. Vela felt something strange in her chest, a tightness that she did not usually associate with watching someone volunteer for a dangerous mission. She realized, with some surprise, that she was worried about the human. Drellick approved the team. Mara, Dr. Palax, an engineer named Rick, and an emergency responder named Thessa. They suited up in the equipment bay, and Vela watched Mara pull on the heavy rescue armor like it weighed nothing. The suit was designed for larger species and hung loose in some places, but Mara adjusted the straps with quick, practiced hands. Be careful, Vela said, standing near the shuttle bay doors. Mara looked at her and did something unexpected. She reached out and placed her hand on Vela's shoulder. The touch was warm. Human body temperature ran higher than most species, and Vela could feel the heat through her uniform. I will be back, Mara said. Save some of that terrible cafeteria soup for me. Then she walked onto the shuttle and the doors closed. The mission lasted 11 hours. Vela monitored the communication channel from the medical ward, listening to fragmented transmissions that came through between bursts of static. She heard Mara's voice more than anyone else's. The human talked constantly, to the injured miners, to her team, to herself. She gave instructions in a calm, steady tone that cut through the chaos like a blade through water. I need light over here. There's a pulse. He is alive. Hold this. Do not move him. His spine might be damaged. Breathe with me, nice and slow. That is good. Dr. Palix's voice came through at one point, shaky and thin. The tunnel is shifting. We need to move. I have 2 more patients pinned onto this beam, Mara replied. I'm not leaving them. Torres, the ceiling is going to come down. Then it comes down. Help me lift this beam or get out of my way. There was a long silence on the channel. Then Vela heard the sound of metal groaning, followed by grunting. Human grunting, raw and strained. And then Palix's voice again, this time filled with something Vela could only describe as disbelief. She lifted it. She actually lifted it. The shuttle returned at 3 in the morning, station time. Vela was waiting at the bay doors with a full medical team. The shuttle ramp lowered, and the first thing she saw was Mara Torres carrying a Drenari miner over her shoulders. The miner was easily twice her size. His legs hung limp, and his head was against her back. Mara's face was streaked with dust and sweat, and there was blood on her hands, some of it yellow, some of it blue, some of it red. Behind her, the rest of the team brought out 12 more survivors on stretchers. 14 miners had been trapped. 13 were alive. 1 had died before the team arrived. Mara set the Drenari miner down on a stretcher and guided the medical team through each patient's injuries with clinical precision. She listed fractures, internal bleeding risks, dust inhalation levels, and pain management recommendations. She had memorized every injury on every patient during the rescue. When the last patient was taken to the ward, Mara sat down on the shuttle ramp. She put her head in her hands. Her shoulders shook. Vela realized, with a shock, that the human was crying. 1 died, Mara said, her voice cracked and raw. I was not fast enough. Vela sat down next to her. She did not know what to say. On her world, losing 1 patient out of 14 in a mine collapse would be considered an extraordinary success. The expected survival rate for that kind of disaster was less than 30%. Mara had saved 93% of the trapped miners in hostile gravity, in poisonous air, in a tunnel that was collapsing around her, and she was crying because she could not save them all. You saved 13 lives today, Vela said quietly. Mara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. It should have been 14. Vela understood, in that moment, something fundamental about humans. They did not measure success by what they achieved. They measured it by what they failed to protect. Every life lost was a wound they carried. Every person they could not save became a weight on their shoulders that never fully lifted. It was beautiful. And it was terrible. And Vela thought it might be the most human thing she had ever seen. Something changed on Waystation Arella after the mining rescue. It was not a big, obvious change. There was no announcement, no ceremony, no official shift in policy. But the station felt different. Vela noticed it in small ways. In the way people looked at Mara when she walked through the corridors, in the way conversations stopped and then started again with a different energy when she passed by. Fear had been replaced by something else. Vela was not sure what to call it. The closest word or language was Kellerish, which roughly translated to the feeling of standing near a fire on a cold night. The knowledge that something powerful was nearby and that its power was being used to keep you warm. The miners Mara had saved told their story to anyone who would listen. The Drenari she had carried on her shoulders, a male named Gore who weighed nearly 160 kilograms, came to the medical ward every day to sit with her during her breaks. He did not say much. He just sat near her like a moon in orbit and occasionally brought her food from the miner's galley, which was significantly better than the station cafeteria. She carried me, he told Vela once, his deep voice thick with emotion. Like I was nothing. Like I was a child. No one has ever done that for me. Soli, the Vin child, was healing rapidly now. She followed Mara around the ward like a small blue shadow, clutching paper animals in both hands. Mara had taught her to fold more complex shapes, flowers, fish, a four-legged creature she called a dog. Soli's mother had cried when she saw her daughter smiling for the first time in a month. She had taken Mara's hand and pressed it to her forehead, which was the Vin way of saying, "I owe you a debt I can never repay." And Dusty, the Grellian sand serpent, had fully recovered. Mara had set up a proper habitat for it in the unused storage room next to the intake bay. She visited it twice a day, and the creature, once classified as a level 3 hazard, would coil around her arm and rest its head against her shoulder while she read medical reports. "It likes you," Boru said one afternoon, watching from a safe distance. "Most things do, once they figure out you're not going to hurt them," Mara replied. Vela was beginning to understand something about humans that the briefing files had completely missed. The files talked about human strength, endurance, and aggression. They described humans as apex predators, as persistent hunters, as the most dangerous species to emerge from a death world in recorded galactic history. All of that was true, but it was only half the story. The other half was this: humans had the same capacity for kindness as they did for violence. The same strength they used to carry wounded miners through collapsing tunnels was the same strength they used to sit on cold floors with frightened children. The same stubbornness that made them terrifying in battle made them relentless in healing. They were not monsters who happened to be gentle. They were gentle creatures who happened to be monsters. It was a distinction that changed everything. On Mara's 5th week at the station, Vela was called to Commander Drellick's office. She expected a routine check-in about the volunteer program. Instead, she found Drellick sitting behind his desk with a holographic document floating in front of him, his expression troubled. "Nurse Vela," he said, "I have received a formal request from the Galactic Medical Council to extend the human volunteer program to 15 additional stations across the Helix cluster." "That is good news," Vela said. "It is. However, I have also received a request from the Council's military division." He paused. "They want to classify humans as a medical asset and deploy them to conflict zones." Vela felt cold. Deploy them? The rescue on the Broken Fong was reported widely. The military division believes humans could be effective in combat medical operations, extracting wounded soldiers from active battlefields, performing field surgery under hostile conditions. They want to create a program. Does Mara know? "Not yet. I wanted to discuss it with you first." Drellick leaned back in his chair. "You have spent the most time with the human. You have observed her closely. What is your assessment?" Vela thought carefully. "Commander, Mara Torres did not come here to be a weapon. She came here to help. If you send humans into war zones and call them medical assets, you are not using their strength. You are using their compassion. And there is a difference." "Explain." "When Mara saved those miners, she did it because she cares about living things. That is what drives her. If you put her in a war zone, she will still try to save everyone, but she will also try to save the enemy. She will risk her life for soldiers on both sides. She will not follow orders that tell her to prioritize one life over another. That is not how humans work." Drellick was quiet for a moment. "You believe the military division does not understand what they are asking for. I believe they see a tool. And Mara Torres is not a tool. She is something much more complicated and much more valuable." Vela straightened. "I recommend that the volunteer program continue as it is: civilian medical stations, wildlife recovery, pediatric care. Let humans do what they do best, which is care for things that need caring for. Do not turn their kindness into a resource to be extracted." Drellick studied her face. Then he nodded slowly. "I will forward your assessment to the Council. Your observations have been noted as exemplary, Nurse Vela. The quality of your reports on the human program has not gone unnoticed." Vela left his office with her heart beating fast. She found Mara in the recovery ward, sitting in a chair next to Soli's bed, reading to the child from a datapad. Soli was asleep, her small blue hand resting on Mara's arm. Dusty was curled on the foot of the bed, which was absolutely against every safety regulation on the station, but no one had the courage to say anything. Mara looked up and saw Vela standing in the doorway. She smiled, the human smile with teeth that Vela no longer found frightening. "Everything okay?" Mara asked softly. Vela looked at the sleeping child, the resting serpent, and the human who had somehow brought them all together in a place that was safer and warmer than it had been before she arrived. "Everything is fine," Vela said. "I was just checking on my patients." She did not tell Mara about the military division's request. She did not want to put that weight on the human shoulders. Mara already carried enough. Every life she saved, every life she could not, every moment of suffering she absorbed in her own body like a sponge soaking up water. Instead, Vela sat down in the other chair and watched the ward settle into quiet. Somewhere in the station, the night shift was beginning. Somewhere, miners were telling stories about the human who carried them out of the dark. Somewhere, a paper bird sat on a windowsill, folded by hands that could break bones and mend hearts with equal ease. The galaxy called them Death Worlders. Vela was starting to think they should be called something else entirely. Mara Torres had been on way station Orella for 3 months when the Vrellan ship arrived. The Vrellans were not welcome in the Helix cluster. They were a raiding species, nomadic, aggressive, and known for stripping stations of supplies and leaving nothing behind. Their ships were fast, ugly things covered in scars and welded armor. When one appeared on the station's long-range sensors, Commander Drellick activated the defense grid and ordered all non-essential personnel to shelter zones. Vela was heading to the medical ward when the alarms went off. Red light filled the corridors. The sound was sharp and piercing, and she covered her ears as she ran. She found Mara already in the ward, moving patients into the reinforced interior rooms with steady efficiency. "How many Vrellan ships?" Mara asked without looking up. "1. But that is enough. A single Vrellan raiding crew can be 40 to 60 fighters." Mara nodded. She picked up Soli. The Ven child was crying. Her small arms wrapped around Mara's neck and carried her to the shelter room at the back of the ward. Dusty followed at their heels like a gray shadow, hissing softly at the noise of the alarms. The Vrellan ship did not attack immediately. Instead, it sent a communication. Commander Drellick played it over the station's internal channel so the senior staff could hear. The message was simple. The Vrellans wanted medical supplies. They had sick crew members. A disease was spreading through their ship, something respiratory that their own healers could not treat. They were not requesting help. They were demanding supplies, and if the station refused, they would take them by force. Drellick muted the channel and looked at his advisors. "Options. Give them the supplies," said the station's security chief, a scarred Felthari named Kasich. "We cannot survive a boarding action. Our defense grid will hold off their ship, but if they send ground teams through the maintenance shafts, we do not have enough security personnel to stop them. If we give them supplies, they will come back," Drellick said. "Every raiding group in the sector will know we surrender to threats." The room was tense. Vela stood in the back, listening. She felt helpless. This was not a medical problem. This was a military problem, and she had no answers for it. "There is another option." Everyone turned. Mara Torres stood in the doorway of the command center. She was not supposed to be there. Only senior staff were allowed during a security event. But the guards at the door had apparently decided that stopping the human who had carried a miner twice her size through a collapsing tunnel was not worth the effort. "If their crew is sick," Mara said, "then they're desperate. Desperate people do desperate things. But they also listen to people who can help them." "What are you suggesting?" Drellick asked. "Let me go to their ship. Let me treat their sick." The room erupted. Kasich slammed his fist on the table and said it was suicide. Palax said no medical professional should be sent into a hostile vessel. 2 advisors argued that helping the Vrellans would set a dangerous precedent. One said the Vrellans would simply capture the human and use her as a hostage. Mara waited for the noise to die down. Then she spoke again, and her voice was the same calm, steady tone she used when she talked to frightened animals and crying children. "I'm not asking anyone to come with me. I will go alone. One unarmed human medic on a ship full of Vrellan fighters is not a threat. It is a message. It says we are not afraid, and we are not cruel. We help people who are suffering, even if those people came here to hurt us. She paused. That is the kind of station I thought I was volunteering for. The silence lasted a long time. Drellick looked at Vela. She did not know why. Maybe because she had written the reports. Maybe because she had spent 3 months watching this human and was the closest thing the station had to an expert on what Mara Torres was capable of. She can do it, Vela said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. If anyone can, she can. Drellick closed his eyes. He opened them. Prepare a shuttle. Mara left 20 minutes later with 2 cases of medical supplies, a portable diagnostic scanner, and nothing else. No weapon, no armor, no backup. Vela watched the shuttle cross the gap between the station and the Vrellan ship on the observation deck screen. It looked so small against the Raider's scarred hull. For 6 hours, there was no communication. Vela stayed at her station, monitoring the channel, her hands pressed flat against the desk to stop them from shaking. Boru brought her water. Gore, the Drenari miner, sat in the hallway outside the medical ward with his arms crossed, staring at the ceiling. Soli slept in the shelter room with Dusty curled around her. Then the channel crackled. Waystation Arella, this is Torres. Mara's voice was tired but steady. The respiratory infection is a variant of Kelleran throat blight, treatable with standard antivirals and fluid therapy. I have treated 19 patients so far, 23 more to go. The Vrellan captain has agreed to stand down. He is requesting formal medical aid and is offering to pay for supplies with unrefined or from their cargo hold. Drellick leaned forward. He is offering to trade? Yes, Commander. It turns out that when you show up unarmed and fix someone's sick child, even Vrellans become reasonable. There was a pause, and then Mara added something quieter. Their children are beautiful, by the way. They have these little tusks that poke out when they smile. The Vrellan ship left the next day. It did not fire a single shot. It did not take a single supply crate by force. Instead, its captain, a massive, scarred male with one eye and a voice like grinding stone, stood at the airlock and watched Mara walk back to the Orella shuttle. He said one word to her as she passed. Vela heard it on the communication channel. The word was Melican. Boru, who had studied Vrellan linguistics at university, told her later that it meant the one who heals enemies. It was the highest honor in Vrellan culture. They gave it to warriors who were brave enough to show mercy. When Mara returned to the station, there was no crowd waiting. No applause. She walked through the quiet corridors to the medical ward, checked on her patients, and sat down in her usual chair next to Soli's bed. Dusty crawled into her lap. Soli, now awake, offered her a paper flower. Mara took it, held it gently, and said thank you. Vela stood in the doorway and opened her observation report for the last time. She had been writing these reports for 3 months, documenting every remarkable thing the human had done. She had described the surgery on the serpent, the paper folding with the Ven child, the mining rescue, the standoff with the Vrellans. She had filled pages with data and analysis and professional observations. But for her final entry, she wrote only this. The galaxy calls humans Death Worlders because they come from a planet that try to kill them every day of their existence. We assumed this made them hard. We assumed their world burned the softness out of them and left only the sharp edges behind. We were wrong. Their planet did not destroy their gentleness. It made their gentleness strong. They're soft in the way that water is soft. It yields to everything, flows around every obstacle, and given enough time, it wears down mountains. I recommend the continued expansion of a human volunteer program to every station in the Helix cluster. Not because humans are useful, not because they are strong or brave or resilient, though they are all of these things, but because they are kind, and the galaxy needs more kindness. She saved the file. She closed her screen. And then she walked into the ward and sat down beside the human and the child and the serpent. And for the first time in a very long time, Waystation Orella felt like home.